Hello, everybody. Kristan Kershaw here, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Suzanne Kullberg, and a special guest. We've got Kristen Ottaway from Spray Free Pharmacy. So I'm a bit excited to do this. We haven't done a discussion around sort of this angle on the podcast at all yet, but Kristen and I have known each other for, I don't know how many years now, quite a few years. And I've been buying Spray Free Pharmacy foods for most of those years. Kristen, could you give the listeners and the viewers, depending on which platform they're coming to us from, a bit of an overview on who Spray Free is, who you and Trevor are, and just a bit so that people know what this thing is?
Sure. So we live in Brisbane and we have an online organic food store. So we source organic and spray-free foods from our network of local farmers. We've got about 25 farmers now, plus a whole bunch of makers and all your organic groceries. So we've got a local bakery, like organic bakery, the organic dairies, everywhere like that. So we gather it all up and we deliver it to our network of pickup points. We've got about 34 of those. And home delivered to people's doors. And we've been doing it for about 8 years now.
That is so awesome. I just, of all things, a delivery driver happened to come right now. I'm like, are you serious? Anyway, he's leaving now, so I think he must have left my parcel, hopefully. And I'm one of those pickup points. And I love doing that. And I've done it. We did it some years ago, had a bit of a break when you lived in this area. And then we've done it again for I don't know how long. It's so nice to be able to have that, just that local community feel, like the different people that we see come here, and I see the cars each week, so I get to know who the regular pickups are versus different times different people come. But it's so convenient because then you can just get the goodies that you need in a suburb near you type thing. You don't have to drive far.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it was always part of our model to begin with, that we would have the pickup points, because it gives people an opportunity to not have to travel far, plus it keeps our costs down, because if we had to deliver to every single door, that's a lot more fuel, a lot more food miles, a lot more drivers.
Yeah. And food miles is a big thing that many people listening today may not really understand. I certainly do, and am a big fan of reducing it where we can. So if someone goes to a big name supermarket, for instance, the food, chances of it being local are really little, right? So a lot of your farmers are Southeast Queensland. I know some are a little bit further afield for things that are seasonal or not able to grow at all times of year here, but the vast majority are in this area. Do you have any, and this is, I'm putting you on the spot, do you have any stats on how far some of the other veggies may come from that would, for the big chains, how much petrol goes into that? How much time they're stored in fridges and that sort of thing?
I don't have hard stats, but I do know that the supermarkets also do source stuff from overseas when things are out of season here. Like if you find asparagus in the supermarkets and it's not spring, it's definitely not Australian, and many other things like that. But they are sourcing from all over the country as well. And they do keep things in storage for quite a long time. I mean, you don't have to look far to find articles on apples that are a year old that are in the supermarkets, because they're kept in storage for long periods of time. Bananas as well, they're picked really underripe and they're kept in storage for long periods of time, and they're gassed to put them to sleep and they're gassed to ripen them. So, you're just not getting the nutritional value that you get from eating locally and seasonally produce that is picked fresh off the trees and you eat it straight away. There's nothing that beats that. And one of the things people tell us all the time is they're so surprised to taste one of our bananas, because they're like, I've been eating supermarket bananas and this tastes nothing like it. This is what a real banana tastes like. They say it's like going back to what their grandparents had, because their grandparents grew a lot in their backyards, and that was what real food tasted like. I think a lot of people have actually forgotten what it tastes like.
Yeah. And the more food miles there are, the more chances that has not been picked recently, whether there's cold storage involved or not. If most of your food is coming from thousands of k's away, and this goes for whether listeners are in Australia, whether you're overseas, try and get food that's local to you and freshly picked, because it makes such a big difference too. We should be eating seasonally what's actually naturally ripening now, not what ripened a year ago. And what's growing local to us from a minerals point of view, there's all sorts of information out there, and you sort of have to dig a little bit. But certainly in my journey as a RCP consultant, I've found that the nutrient profile of soils in areas near where we are is more likely to give us the nutrients that we need, whereas different soils, you get different nutrient profiles. So I'm really keen on, who doesn't want to reduce the amount of fuel that's used to get something to us realistically? I think at face value, even if you don't go into the climate change realm and all that sort of stuff, which we all have an impact. I'm not going to get into that debate because different people can get very heated on it. But generally speaking, I think all humans can recognize that we have an impact on nature around us. So if a big truck is carrying lots of produce from thousands of k's away versus Trev or, your delivery drivers coming into Rockley and from their farms, and that's it, right? The farmers, do they bring it to you, or do you collect, or is there a bit of a mixture there?
Bit of both. We have our farmer Kel. So to start the business off, we went into partnership with her, and she is this amazing lady who never stops working, honestly. But so down to earth, so real. And she has a farm up at Woodford, so she grows a lot of the stuff there. And then she and her husband and her son, we're very much a family business, travel around to a lot of neighbouring farms, and they pick it up for the farmers. So most of them we do pick it up for them because it's hard for them to get their produce in. So we just try to make it as efficient as possible and pick up from one area. We go down to Stanthorpe and get the best apples straight off the trees down there. Yeah.
Oh, yes, I'm very biased towards these apples, especially the Gran Ellie ones. I was very excited when you recently added the names of the growers to the things. I was so happy to see that, because I'm like, oh, I know those apples. I like those apples.
Yeah, so that's what we're trying to do, is be, we're really transparent. We're really open. We'll tell you exactly where things come from. And we want people to connect with where their food's coming from. I mean, it's so rewarding to know that's the farmer who grew that, and to tell your kids, this is where it actually comes from. This is what an apple looks like on the tree. Because so many kids, I mean, if you ever saw Jamie Oliver's thing in America where he went into the schools, and kids had no idea what half the fruit and veggies were, let alone how they grew, where they came from.
Yeah. Suze, at this stage, have you got any questions? Or again, I have had a lot more exposure in this area and love it. It's like, makes my body just go, oh, hearing all about it.
I always have questions, Kristan. I always have questions. So to start with, especially for people listening and not watching the video or haven't looked at the show notes, given the name of your place is Spray-Free Pharmacy, I've seen it because Kristan sent me through your profile before we got on. Do you ever get people, like, because to me, pharmacy, I go immediately to medicine, like as in, like medicine, as in, do you ever get people like food is medicine, which both of your shirts say, but the spelling of it is actually quite clever. So how did the name come about is my first question.
Yeah, good question. We do get some weird phone calls, by the way. Mostly it's more like about the spray bit. We actually get phone calls from people asking if we sell sprays for your garden, like the opposite of what we do. But the name came about, it was actually my husband's idea, funny enough. And he was going to start a cafe. It was going to be called the Whole Food Pharmacy. And we had this logo made up, logos on the back. But it's a man with his roots down into the soil and arms up to the sky. And it was going to be a cafe. And then that didn't work out. And then we started a market stall. So it became the Market Pharmacy. We did juices and smoothies. And then somehow or other, we morphed into this and it became the Spray-Free Pharmacy. So it's been through a few iterations, but, it was all formed in the basis of food is medicine, or poison, depending on what you choose.
I love that. It's so awesome. And then something you alluded to, you mentioned eating seasonally. And like my first thought, Kristan knows I'm nothing if not direct, and listeners will know, will be like, yeah, like we know that. But for people who are like, okay, like I've heard this message enough times, it's really starting to sink in. It can sound like a big overhaul to go from eating the mass-produced or the supermarket or, you know, whatever's convenient to like, actually, I'm going to pay attention to where my food is sourced from and what's actually seasonal and stuff. Where would you recommend people start?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think the further you get into this and you realize that we're actually surrounded by chemicals every day, everywhere. Food is the one thing that you can really control. You know, it's you consciously putting that in your mouth every day. So making a conscious choice around that is huge. It's so empowering, because if you want to feel your best, if you want to show up and be the best version of yourself, you've got to fuel your body with the best food. So to me, the best place to start is just to look at going back to basics. Get away from the packaged stuff and just go to a real piece of fruit, a real vegetable, meat, you know, your basic things, and see what you can create from that.
Yep. Simplifying is often, so when I started this, it was so long ago. It feels like so long ago and yet not all at once. We were still in elimination diet territory. I think you were running in 2015, weren't you, Kristen?
Yeah,
was that early days?
That's when we started. Yeah.
So I have a recollection that it was around 2015, 2016. We were starting to expand out our diet. So for anyone that hasn't listened to other episodes, my youngest and I ate about 15 different foods for the first 2 years of her life, and at times even less than that. And then as we got more confident that she wasn't going to have reactions, then as she got older, that expanded. And then once she stopped breastfeeding, then I was able to go back to a lot more foods, and we gradually got her eating more and more variety. But for a long time, we were fearful of reactions, and it wasn't because of spray-free or not and that sort of thing. It was just to the foods themselves. Interestingly, though, along that journey, we had been told, so if anyone's ever heard of the Feingold diet or fail-safe diet, it's where you do eliminating of certain food groups which have natural food chemicals. And within that, they really harp on about, okay, you can't have organic fruit and vegetables because they're naturally higher in the salicylates and the amines and these things. And I'm like, why is that? I remember asking myself in those days, why was that? You know, anyway, that's nature's way of protecting against. So they were literally saying, oh, we'll use the commercial stuff because then it's got less of the other. And I'm thinking, because it's covered in sprays, which can't be good for the body. So I remember going through the, how do I even begin this type feeling, like what you described, Suze, of, okay, I'm getting in my brain that I really actually want to let nature give me the nutrients rather than the sprays protect me from this. And as we got more confident that the foods weren't going to cause a reaction, it was a no-brainer. Then we had the financial consideration of going from the mindset of, well, I can just get it for a couple bucks a kilo at Coles, Woolies, whatever the big supermarket might be, or even just from our local Foodworks, you know, your IGAs, your smaller supermarkets, where you don't necessarily know where they come from too. And as much as I really like our local one, I think they source stuff fairly well. I think a lot of the time they still go to the Rockley markets and just buy whatever happens to be there. And that you don't know the origin of it. You don't know how long it's been stored for. Any of what you were just talking about, Kristen, before, you actually don't know. Certainly not spray-free or anything at any of them unless they note that they're organic. Anyway, I just kind of went, and so all I did was I started ordering. At first, you had pre-done boxes, and we ended up getting some of those, and then we would give away the stuff we couldn't eat because at that time, tomatoes, you know, there were certain foods that were just too high in the natural chemicals for us and might be a reaction, and then we realized we could actually use them. But then when you switched on the capacity to just order what you want, we would get just a little order, and it was so nice to be able to get some things that were spray-free. So I'd encourage the listeners, if you're doing it, start, instead of getting general apples, swap to organic ones. See if you can find, if you're not in Southeast Queensland, if you're in Southeast Queensland, I'm going to give spray-free a complete plug here. Find if there's a drop-off point near you and see whether you can do a trial order. We'll talk a bit more about that, what it looks like later, but find someone close to you who has seasonal fruit and veg. There may be a community garden near you. There may be a local like Farmer Kel that you were describing who sells stuff right near you and who can make it a whole lot easier. And then you know exactly where those nutrients are coming from. That certainly helped me to begin when it was all just too overwhelming. Just start with one little thing or one small order. And I'm sure over time you see people that become repeat customers and they gradually, like us, our orders get bigger and bigger over time because you get more used to it.
I think another good place to start too is the Dirty Dozen. As much as it is an American thing, so it's not exactly, you know, the same in Australia, because we actually have some of the highest pesticide usage in the world in Australia, including a lot of chemicals that are banned in other countries because they cause all kinds of horrible health conditions. But the Dirty Dozen lists the top 12 that are the worst offenders, like the produce that is grown with the most amount of chemicals. So they're definitely the ones you want to avoid. So even if you just start by switching over to those, which is things like your apples, grapes, berries, obviously the very poorest things, they're the worst. So if you were to start somewhere, that you can always do that, switch over to incorporating more of those into your diet.
Yeah, it's a gentle way to ease into it if you're worried about, you know, not being sure and trying to reduce that overwhelm. And something else that I love too about the premise of what you do is also giving transparency to the farmers as well, that they get payment much more easily and they know that they're supporting a community. Whereas I imagine for them, they pour their heart and soul into growing stuff and then it goes off to a big contract and they wouldn't necessarily get feedback on it or anything. So
no, we keep in touch with them, you know, and one of the other things we do is make sure they get a fair price. So I think you touched earlier on pricing and, you know, that it can be quite daunting for people to go from the supermarket to make that switch to organic. And most people will tell you that the number one block is affordability. But what I think around that is, firstly, the supermarkets have skewed our expectation of what food actually costs. And the farmers that have actually grown that fruit, they don't get a fair price for what they have worked hard to produce. So organic, you know, and what we do is making sure that they do get a fair price, but we're also really, like, if you compare pricing, we're sort of in between because we do welcome spray-free farmers and not just certified organic, because it is timely and expensive to become certified organic. And some of our farmers are just backyard farmers, you know, they've just, like, we have a guy in down Lockyer Valley. He just grows tomatoes and zucchinis and he rotates that in his 1 acre yard. And we get tons of beautiful zucchinis and tomatoes from him. But it would not be practical for him to seek organic certification. So that helps to keep the costs down as well, because we do welcome both types of farmers.
Yeah. And the quality of the produce is amazing. And if there's anything that's ever not quite right, then just as a customer speaking here, you always make right. So it rarely happens anyway, but hello, you know, Mother Nature is not always perfect. And sometimes there are things that don't go quite right. So customer service is really important there. But generally speaking, again, if you connect with, if someone's in New South Wales, like Suze is, or someone you're listening to this in another country, if you connect with your farmer, you can learn so much more about what they're doing and just get it when it's right. Okay, there's a glut right now, here, come and get some extra or whatever. And you cycle through and go, hey, this is new season, like pineapples are back this week. I noticed that. Or at the time of recording this, I should say. But it's just amazing to see. So how that nutrient cycle, I guess, starts to the feedback cycle from the humans going, hey, we really like your apples or your pineapples or your dragon fruits. Oh, the dragon fruits. All these things, it gives you extra capacity to also nourish your body at a deeper level and then know that you're helping the farmer to get a fairer price and that their produce is used. Because that's the other thing of recent years is post-COVID time, the number of farmers that are saying they don't have markets to sell to because maybe they don't have big contracts or they don't have people to pick or whatever. I love the fact that we're getting the produce within days of being picked, and that it's from people that we're helping them to keep their farm be sustainable as well.
Yeah, and it's so important. I mean, it's a scary time actually, because we're seeing less and less farmers. There's a lot that retire, you know, there's an aging population of farmers, and they retire and they don't have family to take over because, you know, their children have watched and they don't want to get engaged in this kind of work because it is often for so little reward. It is backbreaking work, and you're at the mercy of the elements. I mean, our farmer Dennis from Grand Alley Orchard a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, he lost his entire crop of stone fruit to a black frost. It's like this random event that happens every now and then, but it just destroyed all of his stone fruit. That would have been, you know, $1 million worth of stone fruit gone like that overnight. So it is scary, and we need farmers and we need to support them now more than ever. So it is actually really promising. And for people in other areas, look for CSAs, community supported agriculture systems. So they are where farmers are selling direct to the public. And sometimes they only have a small amount of things to offer, like they might have meat or eggs or their own honey or their own leafy greens. But if you get behind those enterprises, what they are doing for the world is amazing. Have you seen the documentary Kiss the Earth?
Oh, yeah.
Kiss the Ground, sorry?
Yeah, Kiss Ground, yep.
Yeah, they talk about this a lot. They talk about the fact that we only have what they estimate is another 60 years of topsoil left because of the way farmers are ploughing, tilling the earth continually, and they're spraying all of these chemicals. They're actually destroying the soil. And this is why we need these regenerative farmers, because they're coming along and they are actually restoring the soil. They're restoring the microbes in the soil, and they're actually capturing carbon. So if you want to talk about climate change, this is the solution. Like, this is what can fix climate change, is more of these regenerative farmers everywhere.
Yeah,
I love the CPA that you said or whatever. Like in most CSA in most communities, there would be a farmer or someone who comes. Like I remember we used to live in Singleton, in the Hunter Valley, and I can't remember his name. It's terrible, but it has been, I don't know how many years since we left. But he'd come on Thursday and Fridays, and you'd have to get there early because it'd sell out. And I think sometimes the locally sourced or the things, like, we've come to a society of convenience. And trying to get there before they sell out, or going, well, they don't have this ingredient and my kid wants this, or I want, like sometimes it's kind of like overcoming that convenience thing to have, what is available and support the locally. And as you said, that they get a fair wage, because the cost part, and I understand that being a big factor for many people, but also what is the cost of not putting your health first in whatever way? Because if you buy something that is organic, that yes, cost per kilo is more expensive, I'm not denying that. The first thing is, how long does it last? I know when I bring home some fruit from the supermarket, I swear it rots in the car on the way back. So how long do you get from that? Because if you have to keep going every day or two, then there's the cost of travel, the cost of time, that kind of thing. And the second is the long-term cost benefit to your health of, you were mentioning, Kristan, about eating seasonally for the nutrient profile, that your body is craving the things in your area. So it's so many factors, but I loved how you mentioned it does feel overwhelming at first. We're not denying that. And I think for so many of us, we can go into these extremes. It's like, I'm going to eat only organic, and oh my goodness, can't afford that, going to go back. And I loved your mentioning of the Dirty Dozen, and okay, researching these. I assume you meant, you didn't specify, but the dozen most treated things were apples, berries, things like that. Yeah. And even if that's okay, I'm just going to focus on that. And, that could be your focus, listeners, for months even. I think where we aren't sustainable with our change is these big dramatic overhauls of our life. I'm going to change my life on Monday. I'm going to quit by Friday. So picking the thing and starting small with that. So I really loved how you brought light to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree. It can be really overwhelming. I remember when I started on this journey, it was because I had some pretty bad health issues. Like I had terrible irritable bowel syndrome for 15 years. And I went to so many doctors and they did all the tests and they said, there's nothing, it's just something you're gonna have to live with. Take Imodium. It's not what you're eating. Mind you, what I was eating was, you know, the conventional diet of cereal for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and pasta for dinner. Like glue, and more glue. No wonder I was bound up. But yeah, I just started by cutting out gluten was my first step, and then just looking at the quality of the ingredients I was bringing in. I just started looking, and when your eyes are open, you can't not see.
Yeah. And you start to learn what feels good in your body and what doesn't. And it may be for you and I, it's gluten. And I think, Suze, I've heard you say, yeah, gluten and I aren't actually all that great of friends either. But it doesn't have to be for everyone. But to be honest, conventional gluten versus organic gluten, that's a whole different kettle of fish for many people. And you may be actually reacting to the sprays. For many people, and celiacs, different story. You know, it's the gluten itself or the grains themselves. But a lot of the time, the sprays, so just from a minerals point of view, for instance, with gluten, many farmers don't know that when they spray with glyphosate to kill the crop when they want it killed, rather than naturally letting it die off at the end of the season, that glyphosate, they get told there's no residue, there is no problem with people consuming it when it's being sprayed. But that glyphosate, it binds to copper in our bodies and it causes metabolic changes as a result. So whether it's literally the residue of the glyphosate in our gut, affecting our bacteria in our gut or whatever, but it's literally changing metabolically our bodies. And so with time, if people go spray free, no matter whether it's, we're talking gluten or other things where this glyphosate and other poisons are used, it can literally change your metabolics. So can you not afford to make changes towards less and less sprays? And it's not about all or nothing. Like Suze was highlighting, many of us are like, right, I'm going to sweep out the pantry and just start from scratch. That may not be practical for the vast majority of people. You know, once you know better, you do better. Okay, so if you start reading labels and going, oh, I don't want preservatives, there may be some foods that have preservatives and you painfully throw them out. Or I remember having discussions on the pros and cons of, I hated food wastage because I'm like, so much has gone into making this and the wastage of that versus putting it in my compost heap or chucking it out, one or the other, because it's got something in it that I don't want us to eat. And then I felt like I had a really big ethical thing, because do I want to go and give it to a friend or whatever, put it on Facebook and say, hey, I've got some in-date food, but we're no longer going to eat it because it's got preservatives in it. I remember having someone tell me off going, there are people starving out there and that poor person on the street will be happy to eat your wrap or, you know, whatever it was that had preservative. And I'm like, that person on the street is the person who needs the healthiest food possible. I didn't want to throw it out. Like, it's a really tough one to decide because they are hungry and they will eat anything. They also need quality food just like anyone does. And they just need real food. All of us just need real food. And this, I say this not from a judgment point of view at all, because I've been there and I've thought that I was eating good food and that it was healthy and all the rest of it, and then realized that there was all sorts of things in there which I thought the government, so naive, I thought the government would not let us have things in our food chain that were going to be poisonous to us. And it's just not the case, unfortunately. The fact that there's so many organophosphate chemicals used in farming here that are banned elsewhere, like you were mentioning before, because they impact so heavily on not only the food itself and the direct impact that it may lead to, but the soil that our food is grown in gets absolutely hammered by these chemicals. And anyone who tries to tell you that there's zero impact on the soil, I ask that you take that with a grain of salt and do some more reading, because don't take my word for it. Go and do some of your own reading. It's not one of these things that, hey, trust me, I know stuff. it's a thing. But regenerative agriculture, you touched on this. This is an area where I could talk forever and ever. And there's actually a webinar I've done on the topic last year, or on ancestral eating. And I got my little moment of limelight to go, this is why regen agriculture, because often the regenerative food is higher in nutrients than it would be if you just looked at it as organic. And I know some of your farmers are really actively working in that field as well, right? So
Yeah.
could you give an everyday person version, because Kristan is known for getting into the depths of the weeds, could you give an everyday definition of, or description of, what regenerative agriculture looks like for, everyday people?
Yeah, sure. One of the best places to start looking into that, I think, is there's a film called Polyfaces, and there's another one called Biggest Little Farm. I love films, by the way. I'll rattle off 100 of them. But they really go into this. Joel Salatin is like one of the founders of this kind of method of farming, and it's essentially about rotating animals on the land, particularly cows, pigs, and chickens, and then the manure and the actions of those animals, like the way that they scratch and step on the soil, it builds this beautiful quality soil. And what Joel Salatin's managed to do in the States is turn this rundown piece of land into this nutrient-dense food bowl that holds water. So it's drought-proof. It is, it's all weather-proof too, because when the rains come, they don't wash away the soil. Like when we leave soil exposed, and this is the thing with regenerative farming, the thing you do not do is leave the soil exposed. Mother Nature wants to be covered up. She needs something on her, and that protects the soil. It protects all the microbes in the soil. So that, of course, when you grow food in soil like that, because all of the nutrients of the plant are coming from the soil, all the minerals, they're coming from the soil. So if the soil is lifeless, your plant is lifeless. Like it's like, and this is the thing when you're buying organic and you're buying from regenerative farms, it's like the supermarket apple is, this might be $1 and this apple might be $2.50. I don't know. But the difference is, like, this is your dirty fluoridated tap water as opposed to the pure thing from the spring. It's completely different. This has got so much more for your body.
Yeah. The depth of the profile of the nutrients is so different, and damaged farms can come back from the brink and be productive again, and because the nutrients can be in the soil and the sprays just make them not available. So letting the soil come back to life is so important. Suze, I can see you've unmuted. What else would you like to?
I love that description of, nature wanting to be covered and, what is the soil, because I think not always, because obviously sometimes there's a different size when you look at something that is, organic versus something, mass produced. But sometimes just from the outside, you can't tell. Like, it's like, oh, well, if you can't tell, I'm just going to go the cheaper one. Same as if you look traditionally at calories in terms of eating something. It's like, well, it's going to be 50 calories for this Frodo frog or 50 for this banana. Well, I'm just going to eat the Frodo because I prefer chocolate, not looking at the constituents of everything else. When you're saying, so looking at everything that goes into it rather than the outside profile. My other thing was, like, for people who, like, I know Kristan gets really into the weeds of the details, as you've said, and the names of things, and like people like me, it's kind of like, yeah, I love that you love that. It's kind of like imagining Kristan's like, I want to go on a marathon. I'm like, well, I'll stand at the finish line with my pom-poms going, yay! I want the benefits of the marathon without actually the grind of like running it and knowing the ins and outs. So for people who perhaps don't live in Southeast Queensland, because if they do, obviously come to you guys. But like, how would you recommend, because sometimes it can be a bit clandestine, like finding an underground community, like where would they start with, like, where do I go to, like, and also what kind of questions do they ask? Because say I went down to my local food mart here, because I'm in a city, how do I ask that without looking like, I don't know, a bitch? Where did this come from?
That's a good question. And that honestly, that's something I do quite regularly. If I go into a shop, I am that bitch. And I do get the looks. I know, but the thing is, it's my body and it's my family and it's what I'm going to put into them. I want to know. And if you're selling a product, you should be able to answer the question, right? This is the thing that we've lost touch on. But in other places, I'm excited to see there are a lot of businesses like ours, a lot of organisations like us that are emerging. So I think this will become more and more accessible. And another place to look is look for your local co-op. Like they do require a bit more work. I mean, you've often got to go and help and bag things up. But if you're willing to do that, it's a cheaper way for a lot of people. And most communities will have some kind of co-op going on, I've found. Or, you know, there are organic supermarkets. There's lots of places popping up. So you've got to ask around. I usually find if you ask on Facebook, if you just find the right groups, you find the healthy living groups, you find the natural lifestyle groups, and ask in there, someone will point you in the right direction wherever you live.
I love that so much. It's a quotable. It's your body, be that bitch.
Yeah.
Totally. And it's a reality. You have to be like, it's funny. My kids, if we're out and about somewhere and someone says hi to me, they're like, how do you know everyone? Because I'm that person who will, now we laugh about me being an extroverted introvert because I don't actually necessarily love throwing myself in the middle of a conversation. But if I want to know something, I will absolutely approach someone and have a conversation and go, do you know where I could find this? I'm not afraid to ask for directions, put it that way. And I think that's probably how we may have first crossed paths. I don't even know. We've got people that we know in common rather, and probably kids' schools, and we were in circles enough to have crossed pathways somehow. But Facebook has been instrumental to that. And even just local Facebook groups. Hey, does anyone know of any local spray-free produce or spray-free food co-ops or something like that? I think it's becoming more and more acceptable and more accessible, certainly than it was even 5 or 6 years ago. I get to do shout outs in the local Facebook groups for these guys every now and then when it happens local to me.
I've got another question. You may have said it and it may have just gone to the keeper, but I'll ask, what's the difference between spray-free and organic for the people who don't know, like me?
Yeah, not a great deal. So really, it's certified organic, right? That's what we're talking about here versus spray-free. So really, it's a certification. The certification is brilliant. Like they come and they test the soil and they make sure that, you know, there's no sprays from neighbouring farms that are coming in there as well. So there's a lot of factors that are considered when you're choosing certified organic. And it is about giving you peace of mind so that you know that this farm is definitely adhering to all these standards that are set by the ACO body, right? Whereas spray-free is farmers who don't use any sprays on their land. Like they do build their soil with compost. They know that you have to take care of the soil to grow a good quality plant, right? And we chose to support both because this helps us lower the price. So we go and meet these farmers. We make sure that they are on the same wavelengths as us, that they're definitely not using any chemicals. And you can tell because the produce comes to us, it's still got caterpillars on it half the time. Like it's very much alive. It's vibrant. Like we go and check it out. But that's really the key difference. And the reason that they're not all going to go and seek certification is because it costs thousands of dollars and it takes years to become
100%.
certified.
And you said you have people who have like a crop of this or whatever in their 1 acre. They're not really going to, the expense of that, like becoming a commercial kitchen versus selling to local people, then obviously there's the ins and outs of that. But, you know, some people, the cost benefit analysis isn't there for that. So I remember when I lived in Singleton, the one thing I've managed to grow in my entire life, Kristan, my herb garden, and we'd all like swap stuff. And I was like the rosemary queen. I had bushes that were like taller than my kids, as I have rosemary coming out the wazoo. So it would have been spray free, but I wasn't going to go like no organic path for this.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? This is what the beauty of spray-free pharmacy is. You can have the pineapple farm, the producer like Kel who has lots of things in hers, or the guy in the Lockyer Valley who has just tomatoes and zucchinis. How awesome is that these individual farmers then don't have to put lots and lots of specific time into where am I going to sell this? How am I going to get it to market? Like it's really nice for me as a consumer to know that I'm part of that cycle of supporting them in that way too, because that's bringing their stress down, which means they can put more energy into their farming and not have to be worried about the chains. Whereas the big, like the Coles and the Woolies and the big conglomerates, they expect certain, you've got different grades and it needs to be this and it needs to be that. And then they get paid the bottom dollar as well. And I gather that getting payment can be slow and all the rest of it. It's a whole different thing. And not to speak down of the farmers who do the best that they can through those other contracts and that sort of thing, because they're only doing what they've known or what their family tradition has been or whatever. But how amazing would it be to bring it back more and more to the local, and that Coles and Woolies start to develop relationships with local farmers? It's doable. But do I want grapes that have been flown from America that have got different expectations on sprays and whatever else that are grown or provided in the middle of winter for us, which is definitely not when grapes would be mature? Or do I savor every single one of those grapes? My youngest, did you get grapes this week, Mummy? She was hanging out for the grape season to start because it was a little bit later, I think, this year than what it often is. Was there damage from Mother Nature last year with the floods?
Yeah. Same with oh God, what else was it we weren't able to get? Oh, cherries. Yeah, cherries for Christmas. They were mostly destroyed in the floods, so very, very hard to come by, and hence very expensive. So we didn't get many of those last year.
Yeah. But then we can support the farmers when they're back in production this year, and that's the beauty of the cycle. But we haven't imported it from somewhere where it actually wouldn't normally be. Anyway, I could rant there forever. Is there anything else that you want to cover, Suze? I know you have to head off really soon as well, but I think we
touched on a lot of points, and I really liked the discussion about the soil and keeping the soil most full of nutrients, because if you grow it in soil that isn't nutrient filled, then obviously the produce from that isn't going to be. So I think that's something beyond just as I said, it's not generic, but we all understand eat seasonally doesn't mean we do it. It's like a lot of us know what to do, but we just don't do it because we overwhelm ourselves with these big changes. And I liked the focus on starting small. And I love the thing that you were talking about too. The different farmers have the things that they produce, and then by going through an organization such as Spray Free Pharmacy, then you guys kind of do the marketing for them, so they can do what they love, which is their farming, and then it can get to your door. So it's such a lush ecosystem of support. I love that. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Oh, thank you. I love that we get to do that. We get even some of our customers contact us and say, look, I've got 100 eggplants that I've grown in my garden. And we go, yes, okay. You haven't used any sprays, you've got good quality soil, send them over. And then it doesn't get any more local than that.
That is so awesome. So for anyone who is in Southeast Queensland, Kristen, we were discussing the opportunity for them to have a try of Spray Free and get a little extra bonus. Could you describe what that is? And we'll make sure that the code, we provide it in the show notes so that everyone can find it, no matter where you're watching or listening or whatever. What can you just describe the offer that we were talking about before we started recording?
Yeah, sure. Well, we'd be stoked for your listeners to try us out, and we'd be happy to offer $20 off their first order, so they can use that with the code over it. Just put that in capital letters and it will give you the discount off.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Jinx.
We spend a lot of time together. It's too funny. Well, thank you for joining us, Kristen, and I'm really glad to share the message and those little inklings of what little bits can we change? I think for us, it was probably carrots and potatoes. Something really simple like that has then evolved into us getting many different types of fruit and veg. We now get milk most weeks from Spray Free as well. And there's all sorts of other artisan foods that Spray Free in particular offer. And again, the more that you learn about these things, the more that you can support, whether you're in Southeast Queensland or you're further afield, nourishing your body through these key nutrients. You'll feel better for it. You'll concentrate better at work, at school, growing for kids, all the things. So do whatever you can do. One little thing towards it makes a big difference.
Absolutely. I think, can I just touch too, Kristan, when you talked about glyphosate on wheat before, another great documentary, if you want to put in your show notes, is What's with Wheat by Cindy O'Meara, and it is a fantastic look at that. So another really good place to make a switch is just by switching to organic bread. I think even if you didn't cut out the gluten, if you went to organic bread, I think most people would notice a big difference in their health.
Yep. Wholeheartedly support that. Yep.
Maybe that will be the start for Susie's gluten-free journey.
There you go.
That's a baby step I can try. So thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, Kristan will put all your details in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Bye for now.
See ya.